On the day Layla wore her wedding dress, her future mother-in-law hurt her deeply with harsh words. But little did she know, the girl she humiliated would soon change everything in ways she couldn't imagine. Layla gently smoothed the simple dress, her hands shaking as she looked at herself in the mirror of the small church dressing room. The plain white fabric, though simple, held her mother's care in every stitch. "This is enough," she told herself over and over. But deep down, the difference between her life and Rami's felt overwhelming. The memory of his family's disapproval haunted her, their judging stares, the whispers she could barely hear. Her father, Hassan, appeared in the doorway. His strong body and rough hands showed years of hard work. He smiled proudly but also with worry, careful not to wrinkle his worn shirt as he entered. "You look beautiful, sweetheart," he said softly. He came closer, offering her warmth and comfort. "Thanks, Dad," she replied, her smile small but thankful. She took his hand, seeking reassurance. "But I can't stop thinking about what's waiting for me out there." Hassan sighed and put his strong hand on her shoulder. "The only thing that matters is that you two love each other. You'll figure out everything else together." Layla nodded, but his words couldn't completely remove her worries. The cruel words from Rami's parents, Khalid and Nadia, echoed in her mind. "She's just a gardener's daughter," Nadia had sneered, as if it was a shameful thing. "He could have anyone better," their friends often whispered. But Rami had never turned away from her. He always defended her, chose her, and loved her. That love was the one thing she could hold on to, even with all the doubts and judgment hanging over her like dark clouds. The sound of guests settling into the church pulled her back to the present. The ceremony was about to start. Her heart raced as she took a deep breath to calm herself. Sensing her nerves, Hassan squeezed her hand again. "Rami loves you," he said firmly. "That's all that matters today." Her eyes filled with tears as she managed a smile. It was true, but the thought of facing so many people, some kind, some not, felt scary. Meanwhile, outside at the altar, Rami stood nervously, shifting his weight from one foot to the other. He could feel the weight of his family's pressure. He still remembered his father's harsh words. "If you marry her," Khalid had said coldly, "you're out of this family. No inheritance, no help, nothing." His mother, Nadia, had been more gentle, but just as hurtful. "You can have everything you've ever wanted," she said softly, "but not with her. Life with that girl will be hard. She doesn't understand our world. Don't throw away your future for this mistake." Despite their constant pressure, Rami stood firm. His love for Layla was real, deep, and not about wealth or status. He knew the cost of going against his family, but he couldn't imagine life without her. Even so, their pressure felt like a shadow following him. When the church doors opened and Layla stepped into the light, everything else faded away. Rami's eyes locked on hers, and the world seemed to stop. She was everything to him, the one worth risking it all for. Layla walked toward him, her steps slow but sure. The tears in her eyes matched the emotions they both shared. In the front row, Khalid's cold stare pierced the air. Nadia, sitting up straight, looked at her with barely hidden contempt. Every step felt harder, but when Layla's eyes met Rami's, calmness came over her. He was there, her protector in the storm. His love for her was so strong that for a moment she almost forgot about the judgment around her. When she reached the altar, Rami gently took her hands in his, holding them firmly yet softly. The connection between them, silent but deep, spoke louder than any words. In that moment, nothing else mattered. On that important day, Layla whispered to herself, trying to stay strong with every passing moment. She nodded gently, holding back tears. She knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy. The imam began the ceremony with the usual prayers, but before the vows could be said, Khalid suddenly stood up. A wave of whispers spread through the guests. Rami frowned, sensing his father was about to say something painful. "Pardon me, Imam," Khalid interrupted, his voice filled with authority as he stopped the ceremony. "I have something to say before this continues." The Imam hesitated and looked at Rami, but Khalid didn't wait for approval. He turned to the guests and spoke, his voice commanding. "As the father of the groom, I have to make sure everyone here understands what is happening today." Layla felt each word hit her like a physical blow. Rami tensed, ready to speak up, but Khalid kept going. Today my son Rami is going to marry Layla, the daughter of our gardener, Khalid said sharply. I'm not here to insult anyone, but I want to make clear what this means for our family. The guests began to whisper louder, some showing sympathy for Layla, others judging her. My son, Khalid continued, raising his voice, has chosen to ignore everything we have worked for as a family. He's throwing away all the opportunities we've given him to marry a woman who is clearly not his equal. Layla's breath caught in her throat and her chest tightened. But before she could speak, Rami released her hands and stepped forward. Enough, father, Rami said firmly, his voice steady even though anger and pain boiled inside him. Khalid looked at his son with a cold, hard stare. I'm sorry, son, he replied coldly, but if you go through with this, you will lose your inheritance, your place in this family, and everything we've built. There will be no turning back. A heavy silence filled the room. Guests held their breath, knowing this was the moment everything would change. Rami stood still, feeling the weight of his father's ultimatum pressing down on him like an unmovable stone. The room, once full of whispers, now felt empty, with only Khalid's harsh words echoing. Layla looked at Rami, her heart racing, her eyes asking him for reassurance. But at that moment, Rami was torn between anger and sadness, his emotions swirling inside him like a storm. Khalid stood tall, his sharp eyes showing the power he thought he had. But what Khalid didn't realize was that Rami had already made his choice. Father, Rami finally spoke, his voice low but steady. I know what this means for you. I understand what you've always wanted for me in the future you plan, but this is my life, and I choose Layla because I love her. With her, I can find true happiness. Allah shows that our love is real, pure, and not based on selfish reasons. Khalid's face turned dark, his expression filled with disdain. Love, he sneered, the word dripping with contempt. Love doesn't fill bank accounts, doesn't open doors, and certainly doesn't earn respect. Do you really think that with her, you can have the future we've prepared for you? Nadia, Rami's mother, sat quietly nearby, her face showing resignation and sadness. She had hoped her son would choose a decision that would help the family, but watching this family conflict hurt her deeply. Khalid, please, Nadia whispered, trying to ease the situation. This isn't the time for this. But Khalid ignored her, determined to make his son see the consequences of his defiance. Rami clenched his jaw and locked eyes with his father, standing firm despite the pressure. The silence in the room was heavy, each guest frozen in place. Knowing this wasn't just a family disagreement, it was a battle for Rami's future. I don't need your money or your approval to be happy, Rami said, his voice growing stronger with every word. I've realized that what you offer is nothing but a golden cage. He turned to Layla and gently held her hand. She gives me freedom. She is everything I need to feel whole. Tears filled Layla's eyes as she took in his words. In that moment, she understood the depth of his love for her. A love that was deep and real, not temporary or shallow, but a promise to be together no matter the obstacles. Khalid's hands clenched at his sides, frustration boiling inside him. He had always imagined a grand future for Rami, full of wealth, power, and family legacy. But now that vision seemed to fall apart right before his eyes, crushed by the unshakable love Rami had for a woman he thought was unworthy. Rami, you are making the biggest mistake of your life, Khalid said, his voice firm as he stared at his son, almost like a stranger. This woman will ruin you, and when that happens, don't expect us to help. His words stung, and Layla lowered her eyes in silent pain. But Rami, unfazed, gripped her hand even tighter, not letting his father's cruel words affect their love. Then I won't need to come back, Rami replied calmly, though his heart pounded in his chest. If being with her means losing everything else, then so be it. Khalid shook his head slowly, his disbelief clear. Taking a step back, he set down the microphone, realizing he had lost control of the situation. The room was silent now, but it wasn't because of the tension between father and son. It was the guest's shock at what was happening. It was rare for someone like Rami to openly defy a powerful family like his. Finally, Nadia, his mother, stood up. Her steps were slow, her face filled with conflicting emotions. She had hoped it wouldn't come to this, but there was no turning back now. She walked up to Rami, glancing briefly at Layla before focusing on her son. Do you understand what this means for your future? Nadia's voice was soft but heavy with sadness. You know we can't support you if you choose this path. Her words came from a place of love, but also from the harsh expectations of their world. I do, Mama, Rami answered, his voice gentler now. But this is the life I want. Layla is my family now. Nadia's eyes softened, though they filled with unshed tears. She nodded silently, knowing her son had made up his mind. Despite the pain, she wasn't going to fight anymore. With a final sad glance at her husband, who had quietly sat back down, she returned to her seat. As Nadia sat, the ceremony continued, but the tension in the air was still thick. Rami and Layla exchanged their vows, knowing their journey together would be full of challenges. But as they held hands and looked into each other's eyes, they knew the sacrifices they made were worth more than any wealth or family legacy. I love you, Rami whispered as he slid the ring onto her finger, his voice filled with the promise of forever. Layla smiled through her tears, the kind of smile that told Rami they were exactly where they were meant to be. The ceremony ended with scattered applause and murmurs from the guests. What had just happened wasn't just a wedding, it was an act of defiance, a bold statement of love against power and privilege. Hand in hand, Rami and Layla walked down the aisle, their bond unbreakable. As they stepped out of the mosque into the warm desert air, they realized that no matter the obstacles ahead, they had already won their greatest battle, choosing their own destiny, no matter the cost. The months after their wedding felt like a dream for Rami and Layla. Though they had left much behind, they had each other, and that was enough. Their simple apartment in a busy part of Riyadh became their cozy home. Layla made their home warm and personal, adding little touches that showed her love. Rami worked hard, determined to build a new life for them, far from his family's shadow. At first it seemed like love alone could keep them going. Their days were filled with laughter and small successes, but soon trouble began to show. Rami noticed that things were changing in his professional life. Opportunities that were once open to him started disappearing. Companies he had worked with before stopped answering his calls. Meetings that were once routine became hard to set up. At first he thought it was just a coincidence or a natural result of stepping away from his family's influence. But soon it became clear that something more intentional was happening. One afternoon, after yet another failed meeting, Rami sat alone in a quiet cafe. The late afternoon sun shone on the streets outside, but his thoughts were heavy. He looked at his reflection in the glass, trying to understand why their new life was falling apart. Despite everything, he decided to keep holding on to the love that had gotten them this far. But as the pressure from his family grew stronger, he realized that their fight for independence was far from over. It felt like the weight of standing up to his father had finally started to wear him down. Then his phone buzzed. The name on the screen said Faris, an old family friend who had worked at his father's company. Faris's voice sounded serious, almost apologetic. Rami, I wanted you to hear this from me, not anyone else, Faris said quietly. Your father has told everyone. He's made it clear that no good company will hire you. Anyone who supports you or Layla will be going against him. Rami felt his stomach drop. He always knew his father was powerful, but this was more than he expected. Is this revenge? He asked, already knowing the answer. Faris paused, searching for the right words. It's not just revenge. He wants you back, but only on his terms. He says everything will be okay if you leave Layla and return to the family. Rami clenched his fist on the table, feeling anger rise inside him. To his father, everything was just a game, a way to control him. But this wasn't just about business. This was about his life, his marriage, and his love for Layla. That's never going to happen, Faris, Rami said, his voice shaking with anger. I'm not leaving her, no matter what. I understand, Faris said quietly. But be careful, Rami. Your father is determined to ruin every opportunity you might have, and I think this is just the start. Rami ended the call, feeling like the ground had been pulled out from under him. He had known there would be consequences for going against his father, but he didn't expect them to be this severe. He realized he was trapped in a situation he couldn't escape. His father had the power to destroy his reputation in the business world, and now that power was slowly taking everything Rami had worked for. When he got home that evening, Layla greeted him with her usual warm but concerned smile. But tonight, even her kindness couldn't lift his spirits. He sank down onto the couch, not saying a word. His shoulders slumped, and his gaze was distant. "What happened?" Layla asked softly, sitting next to him. He looked at her, and for the first time in a while, he didn't know what to say. He could see that she had already noticed the tension, that money was running low, and the opportunities were fading. Telling her that his father was behind it all made him feel even more helpless. "My father," Rami finally said, his voice low. "He's made sure I can't work anywhere important." Layla sat quietly, taking in the weight of his words. She had always known Khalid could be cruel, but hearing how far he would go, even to his own son, was hard to accept. "And what does he want?" she asked, already suspecting the answer. "He wants me to leave you," Rami said bitterly. "He wants me to go back to his way of life. He says if I leave you, I can have everything back. The life he always planned for me." Layla felt a heavy knot in her stomach. She had wondered before if her love was costing Rami too much. She knew he had given up a lot to be with her, and although he had never said it, she feared that one day it would all be too much for him. But when she looked into his eyes, she saw the strength of his resolve. "I can't ask you to keep losing everything because of me," Layla whispered. Rami took her hand firmly, as though afraid his father's words might drive a wedge between them. "You're not asking me," he said, his voice breaking, but his gaze never wavered. "I chose this. I chose you, and I would choose you 1,000 times. I won't let him win. I won't lose you." Tears filled Layla's eyes, not because she was sad, but because of the strength and love Rami was showing her. They both knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy, and Khaled's shadow would hang over them. In the weeks that followed, things only got harder. Money was running out, and with every job rejection, Rami felt more helpless. His name was becoming associated with trouble, even in places where his father's influence didn't reach. Rumors were spreading. Layla did her best to help, but her resources and connections weren't enough to keep them afloat. One evening, as Rami sat at their small kitchen table, looking through the last few job opportunities, his phone rang again. This time, it wasn't Faris, it was his father. "You know, it doesn't have to be this way," Khaled said, his voice calm but still filled with that cold authority Rami knew so well. "Everything can go back to how it was. You just need to make the right choice." Rami gripped the phone tightly, his anger rising, but he tried to stay calm. "The right choice according to you, father, not according to what I believe. I'm not leaving Layla," Rami said firmly. Khalid paused, his voice still calm, but there was a hidden threat behind his words. "All right, let's see how long you last with nothing. When you have no other choice, you'll know where to find me." Rami ended the call, his hands shaking as he set the phone down. His father's words felt heavy in the air. He knew Khalid would never give up, but neither would he. Still, the reality of their situation was closing in fast. Just then, Layla walked into the kitchen. She stopped in her tracks when she saw the troubled look on Rami's face. "It was your father, wasn't it?" she asked, her voice filled with concern and tired acceptance. Rami nodded without saying a word. He stood up and pulled her into a tight hug. Layla rested her head on his chest, and in that moment, they both understood that this wasn't just about love. It was about facing the constant pressure trying to pull them apart. As Rami gently ran his fingers through her hair, he realized something important. His father might take everything from him, but there was one thing he could never take: the love they shared. As time passed, their struggles grew harder. Money ran out, and opportunities for Rami seemed to disappear faster each day. It felt like they were losing a battle every day. But then, in the middle of all the pain, something happened that brought a little hope. One afternoon, while Rami was out looking for work, Layla sat in their small bathroom, holding a pregnancy test. Her heart raced as she looked at the result. It was clear. She was pregnant. A mix of emotions hit her all at once. She felt joy at the thought of becoming a mother, but also fear about bringing a child into their difficult life. That evening, Rami came home, looking defeated after another unsuccessful day. He saw Layla sitting on the old couch, tears in her eyes. Concerned, he rushed to her side and knelt in front of her. "What's wrong, love?" he asked, his voice full of worry. Layla reached for his hands, giving him a small, tearful smile. "I'm pregnant." For a moment, Rami froze. The words echoed in his mind. A child. A baby. In the middle of everything that had been going wrong, this news brought a warmth he hadn't felt in a long time. Slowly, a smile appeared on his face, and his eyes filled with tears. "Are you serious?" he whispered, his voice full of emotion. "We're going to be parents." Layla nodded, and Rami wrapped her in his arms, holding her tightly as they both let their tears flow. For the first time in what felt like forever, they had hope. This child, though not born yet, gave them a new reason to keep fighting. But soon reality hit. A baby meant more costs and more challenges. They needed a way to make things work. That's when Layla remembered something she had always loved doing: baking. When she was a child, she spent hours in the kitchen with her mother, learning to bake cakes that were simple but filled with love. It was her happy place, and her cakes had always impressed people who tasted them. Maybe this could be the answer we've been looking for, she thought. One evening at dinner, Layla shared her idea with Rami. "I've been thinking," she said carefully, "what if I start selling cakes? It's not much, but if we sell them online, we could make some extra money." Rami looked at her, interested. He knew how great her cakes were, but the idea of turning her passion into money hadn't crossed his mind. "Do you really think it could work?" he asked, already imagining the possibility. "I think it's worth trying," she said, her excitement growing. "You could help with deliveries and we could set up a page to advertise them." Rami smiled, feeling the spark of enthusiasm. "Let's do it," he said with determination. That night they stayed up late planning. Using his basic tech skills, Rami set up a simple social media page to show off Layla's cakes. Layla focused on perfecting her recipes and trying new designs. She wanted every cake to feel special, a reflection of the love she put into it. At first, things were slow. They only sold a couple of cakes to local customers who found their page. But with every order, their confidence grew. Together, they were building something meaningful. It wasn't just about getting by anymore. It was about creating a future for their growing family. Rami made the deliveries on his bike since they couldn't afford a car at first. The work wasn't heavy, but every time he came back from a delivery, he had a big smile on his face. "People love your pastries," he'd say excitedly. "Today someone told me they're the best they've ever had." Even though she was tired from pregnancy and long hours in their small kitchen, Layla felt like they were finally seeing some progress. With each order, her confidence grew. Their tiny kitchen had turned into a makeshift bakery, with flour and sugar scattered across the counters and the sweet smell of baked goods filling the air. The space wasn't much, but it was where their dreams came to life. One day, while Rami was making a delivery to a regular customer, a man in a sharp suit caught his attention. The man's eyes lingered on the pastry box Rami was carrying, and he walked over, clearly curious. "Are those pastries yours?" he asked with a friendly smile. "They're my wife's," Rami answered warmly. "I'm just the delivery guy." The man nodded, studying the box. He introduced himself as Zaid, a manager at a popular cafe chain. "We're looking for something special to offer at our cafes," he said. "These look amazing. Would you mind if we tested them in our flagship location? If they're popular, we could make a regular arrangement." For a moment, Rami didn't know what to say. Was this the big break they had been waiting for? "Of course," he managed to reply, excitement bubbling inside him. "I can bring a bigger sample next week." When Rami got home that evening, he was full of energy. "Layla, you won't believe what happened," he said as he walked in. "A manager from a cafe chain wants to try your pastries. This could be huge." Layla, wide-eyed, looked at him in disbelief. "Are you serious?" she whispered. Rami nodded, pulling her into a tight hug. "We've got this, Layla. This could be the chance we've been dreaming of." That night, as they lay in their small bed, hope filled their hearts. They knew the road ahead would be tough, but now they had a real opportunity to fight for. The next week, Layla put her heart into making the best pastries she could, while Rami made sure the delivery went smoothly. They brought the pastries to the cafe, and Zaid was impressed. not only with the quality, but with the love behind them. A few days later, the call came that would change everything. "We love your pastries," Zaid said. "We'd like to set up a weekly contract." Rami and Layla could hardly believe it. After all the struggles, a real chance had finally come. For the first time, they felt like they were building something truly theirs, something no one could take away from them. As Layla rested her hands on her growing belly and Rami watched her with pride, they knew they had won the most important battle, staying together through all the challenges life had thrown at them. Now they had something to look forward to, a better future for themselves and their child. In the months that followed the contract, things began to change. Orders kept growing, turning their small business into a thriving one. Layla, her belly now showing more, spent hours making new recipes and ensuring every pastry was perfect. Meanwhile, Rami handled the deliveries, contracts, and growing accounts. But success brought its own difficulties. The work was getting harder, and as Layla reached the final months of her pregnancy, she started to feel more tired. One afternoon, while decorating a cake for a new order, she felt a sharp pain in her back. She had to stop for a moment to catch her breath. The pain wouldn't go away. Just then, Rami walked in with a large box of supplies. He froze when he saw her pained expression and quickly set the box aside. "Are you okay?" he asked, worry in his eyes. Layla gave a small smile, brushing off the pain. "I'm fine. The baby is just moving a lot today," she said, though it was clear she wasn't feeling well. Rami knelt beside her, gently taking her hand. "Layla, you need to rest. You've been working too hard." She shook her head softly. "We have so many orders, Mohammed. We can't stop now." Rami looked into her eyes, his voice calm but full of care. "We'll manage together, but you and the baby are the priority. Always." Reluctantly, Layla nodded, knowing he was right. Their journey wasn't just about building a business. It was about building a life, one where they would face every challenge together. And with that shared determination, they knew they could make it through. Rami softly stroked Layla's cheek, his face showing both love and concern. "I know this business is important, but your health and the baby come first," he said gently. "Let me take care of the rest of the day. You need to rest." Layla hesitated but eventually agreed, realizing she couldn't ignore her tiredness anymore. Rami helped her settle on the couch before heading back to the kitchen, determined to finish the orders on his own. That evening, while Layla rested, Rami sat at the small desk, going over their finances and upcoming orders. Their business was growing faster than they expected, which was exciting, but also overwhelming. Hiring help seemed like a good idea, but their finances were still tight, making it a tough decision. The next morning, as they had breakfast with spiced tea and fresh flatbread, Layla looked at Rami thoughtfully. "I've been thinking," she said, her voice a little unsure but hopeful. "What if we open a small shop?" Rami looked up from the newspaper, surprised. "A shop?" he repeated. "Isn't it too soon for that?" Layla's face brightened, her excitement clear. "It's not too soon. If we keep growing like this, we'll need more space. And with a shop, we could hire someone to help me in the kitchen. We can't keep doing everything from home, especially once the baby comes." Rami was quiet for a moment, feeling a mix of excitement and worry. Owning a shop had always been a dream, but after all the struggles they had faced, he wasn't sure. However, as he listened to Layla's enthusiasm, he realized it might not be as far off as he thought. "You're right," he finally said, a smile spreading across his face. "Let's start looking. It won't be easy, but if we find the right place, it could be the next step we need." Layla's relief was clear, and she smiled brightly. Despite all the struggles, the thought of this new chapter made everything feel possible. In the weeks that followed, they felt both excited and nervous as they searched for a place. Rami continued to make deliveries while keeping an eye out for properties, and Layla, even though she was well into her pregnancy, still managed the orders from home. Sometimes a kind neighbor would stop by to help them out, making things a little easier. After weeks of searching, they finally found a small place near a busy market. It wasn't fancy, but it had everything they needed: a big kitchen, a cozy area for customers, and a display window to attract passers-by. The rent was reasonable, and they knew with some effort they could turn it into something special. This is it, Layla said with excitement as they walked through the empty space, imagining what it could become. I can already smell the fresh pastries. This will be our home away from home, Rami said, watching her with pride. Despite everything they had been through, they were creating something that was entirely theirs, something no one could take away. Let's make it happen, he promised, taking her hand. This is our next step. With the lease signed and the keys in hand, they began to make changes to the space. The progress was slow as they juggled preparing the shop and continuing their business from home. But each day brought them closer to their dream. With every improvement to the shop, they could feel their lives changing along with it. One afternoon, while painting the walls of the shop, Layla paused and placed her hand on her belly. I think the baby is excited too, she said with a laugh, feeling the tiny movements inside her. Rami quickly moved beside her, placing his hand on hers to feel the baby kicking. Or maybe we have a future baker on the way, he joked, his eyes filled with love. Layla laughed, but her smile faded as she let out a small groan of discomfort. Rami's face quickly turned to concern. Are you okay? He asked. She nodded, though her face showed she was still in pain. I think it's just the baby moving around, but maybe we should go home so I can rest. Without hesitation, Rami helped her gather their tools, making sure her comfort was the top priority. The shop could wait. Layla and the baby were his main concern. On the way home, they both felt hopeful about the future. Despite all the challenges, they were building something lasting and meaningful. In the days leading up to the opening of the shop, their excitement grew, but so did the pressure. One morning, while Layla was arranging the display cases, she suddenly felt a sharp pain in her abdomen. At first, she thought it was just another pregnancy ache, but it grew stronger. She held onto the counter for support, trying to breathe through the pain. Rami, who was nearby looking at papers, rushed to her when he saw her bending over. Layla, he said, panic in his voice. What's wrong? She tried to smile reassuringly, but the pain was too much. I think, she started, her voice shaky. I think the baby is ready to come. At that moment, everything about the shop seemed unimportant. A new chapter in their lives was beginning, and it had come sooner than they expected. Rami felt a mix of fear and excitement. The moment had arrived. We need to get to the hospital, he said urgently but calmly. He grabbed the car keys and helped Layla stand carefully, his hands gentle but firm. The drive to the hospital was filled with tension and anticipation. Layla focused on breathing slowly, trying to stay calm, while Rami held her hand and kept glancing at her. He was worried, but his unease was silent. When they arrived at the hospital, the staff acted quickly and took Layla to the maternity ward. Rami stayed by her side, trying to stay calm as the hours passed. The pain on Layla's face was clear, but so was her strength. With every moment, Rami admired her more. Finally, after what felt like forever, the sound of a baby crying filled the room. Layla and Rami looked at each other, tears in their eyes, overwhelmed by joy and relief. The doctor carefully placed their baby on Layla's chest, and in that moment, everything seemed peaceful. It's a girl, Rami whispered, his voice filled with emotion. Layla, exhausted but glowing, gazed at their daughter with deep love. She gently touched her baby's soft skin and whispered loving words. Tears streamed down her face as Rami wrapped both of them in his arms. For that moment, nothing else mattered. They were a family. Hours later, while Layla rested with their daughter Maya in her arms, Muhammad stepped outside to take a break. Though he felt joy in his heart, the weight of responsibility still pressed on him. The bakery was almost ready for its grand opening, but a few final tasks remained. As he looked out of the hospital window, his mind drifted to his father, Khalid. He remembered all they had been through to get here. The arguments, the closed doors, the struggles they faced every day, but all of it seemed worth it now. Still, Khalid's shadow lingered in Muhammad's thoughts. He had done everything he could to make their lives harder. But what Khalid didn't see was that the love Muhammad had for Layla was stronger than anything his father could do. But one question still remained. Was he truly free from his family? A few days after Maya's birth, the bakery's grand opening arrived. Layla, still recovering, took care of the last-minute details from home, while Muhammad and some close friends prepared the shop. The small space was filled with balloons, fresh flowers, and a simple sign above the door. The air was filled with the smells of baked goods, kunafa, mahal, and warm spiced bread, welcoming everyone who entered. Opening day was a huge success. Neighbors, loyal customers who had tried their food before, and curious newcomers all came to the shop, drawn by the sweet, inviting smells and the warm atmosphere. Muhammad and Layla were amazed by the busy crowd, almost unable to believe what was happening. Months of hard work, sacrifice, and effort had finally turned their dream into a reality. But amid all the happiness, Rami saw a familiar figure walk into the shop. His stomach tightened as he saw it was Khalid. He hadn't seen his father in months, not since their last argument had ended with bitter words and silence. Khalid was dressed in his usual tailored suit, and he approached the counter slowly, his face unreadable. "Rami," Khalid said, his voice softer than usual, with none of the usual authority. "I wanted to see how things are going." Rami studied him carefully, unsure of what his father was thinking. Was this a real attempt to mend things, or just another way to control him? "We're doing well, Dad," Rami replied, his voice steady, though he could feel his emotions underneath. The air between them was heavy, filled with unspoken words, and the past threatened to take over the present. But for now, Rami stayed calm, determined to protect the life he had built with Layla. Khalid looked at him closely, and for the first time, Rami saw something different in his father's eyes. Tiredness. The man who had always been a rock of strength now looked older, weary, and surprisingly vulnerable. "I'm not here to argue," Khalid said after a moment, taking a deep breath as though summoning the courage to face something he had kept hidden. "I've been thinking. Maybe I was wrong about many things," he admitted. "I thought I was giving you the best by offering wealth and power, but I now realize I was blinded by my pride. Seeing what you built here, your family, this shop, has made me understand that those things aren't what really matter." The weight that Muhammad had carried for so long seemed to lift just a little. He had waited for years to hear those words, knowing they wouldn't erase the pain or change the past. But it was a start, a step towards something better. "All I ever wanted was to be happy with Layla and Layla," Muhammad said calmly, but with determination. "I just wanted you to understand that." Khalid nodded slowly, his face showing both regret and a hint of admiration. "I see it now," he said quietly. "And I'm sorry for putting you in this position. I'm not asking for anything. I just want you to know that I'm proud of what you've achieved." Tears filled Rami's eyes, but he held them back, keeping his composure. He reached out and offered a simple gesture of reconciliation. His hand. Khalid paused for a moment before shaking it. It was a small gesture, but it marked the start of something new. Layla watched from a distance, a feeling of peace filling her. She knew how deeply Muhammad had been hurt by his father's disapproval. Seeing even a small step toward healing gave them both the closure they needed. After Khalid left, silence filled the room once more, but this time it was a silence full of hope. It was a sign that things could change. Not just for Rami and Layla, but also for the family bond that had been broken for so long. "Do you think things will change now?" Layla asked softly, holding Maya in her arms. Rami looked at her, thinking for a moment before answering. "I don't know," he said honestly, "but what matters is that we're okay, and that's not going to change. Everything else will work out over time." Layla smiled, resting her head on Rami's shoulder as they looked out at the setting sun. They had started with nothing, facing challenges that seemed impossible. But they had made it, not because of wealth or status, but because of love and trust in each other. At that moment, holding their daughter in their modest shop, they knew that their success was worth more than any material riches. Their family, built on love and strength, had grown against all odds. The future was still uncertain, but Rami and Layla knew one thing for sure. No matter what came next, they would face it together. And that, more than anything else, was their greatest success. Thank you so much for watching this touching story of love, strength, and hope. It's a reminder that real success isn't about money or status, but about the relationships we build and the love we share. If this story moved you, I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. Have you ever had a moment where love and determination helped you overcome challenges? Share your story. I'd be happy to hear from you. Please like this video, share it with someone who might find it inspiring, and subscribe to the channel for more stories that inspire and touch the heart. And guess what? A new amazing story is ready for you on the screen. Don't miss it. Our next story is sure to grab your attention. Until next time, take care and keep spreading